I'm glad to see you were able to find this video. I'd also be glad to hear from you. Let me know what you want to see or what you're having trouble with so that I can make content that's useful and meaningful to you. With that said, let's jump right in, shall we? So last week we looked at addition and subtraction and how addition and subtraction falls within the orders of operations. Now in theory, addition and subtraction, as it is by itself, should not be new to you. You should feel very comfortable with addition and subtraction. Now if you are having problems with addition and subtraction, I do suggest you take advantage of the digital flashcards that I've created. You can access them either through your phone by downloading the app and take the flashcards with you wherever you are, or you can use the web-based version, so you can hit it with a web browser. And when you use the web-based version, there are some games that you can play. So that way your studying doesn't really feel like studying. It's kind of like a game. But really what we looked at this week was more the methodology of being able to solve an equation. How we solve one operation per step, and that we always want to make sure our line is clean and that we go to a new line every time. So that way we have this nice, clean, easy to read and easy to follow methodology when we're solving equations. So I do hope you take the time to go through that video and actually get some practice with it. And if you are having any trouble, please let me know. I can do a separate video specifically on addition and subtraction. With that said, let's jump into today's video. So today's video is, again, still part of the Order of Operations video series, and this week we're going to be looking at working with signs. And if we think back to our acronym BEDMAS, B-E-D-M-A-S, there is an S, but the S is for subtraction, which we looked at last week. So there really is no working with signs step. And really working with signs isn't specific to orders of operations either, but I wanted to pull this out as a separate module in itself because oftentimes when people are making mistakes in an equation, I find it comes back to not being able to translate two signs, or whenever you're working through an equation, how do you convert two signs together, or are they dropping signs? This is really the area I find most people have trouble with, so I really wanted to take some time to separate it and make sure we understand the methodology of how multiple signs work together before we start making things more complicated. So this isn't really a specific step to the order of operations, but it is still critical. It's one of those fundamental skills that I want to make sure we all have. So today is the lecture portion, so we're going to go into a little more detail about this, and then we'll talk about some examples at the end of this video. So as a quick reminder, there are two types of numbers. We have positive numbers and we have negative numbers. So positive numbers are just the general numbers that we deal with on a regular basis. We have when we're counting, or when we're adding, or just as we live our normal life. When we speak about numbers, we're speaking about them in the positive. Negative numbers, we have to explicitly say that they're negative. So when we look at an equation and there's no sign associated with that number, we can automatically assume the number is positive. That's because that's how we count in numbers and that's how we speak. We don't say $34 or whatever. We don't say positive $34. We just say 34. So we by default know that if a number does not have a sign associated with it, we know it's positive. Now, the reverse of that is we must explicitly say that a number is negative. If we don't say that it's negative, then we're going to assume it's positive. So we will always have to have a negative sign associated with it. Now, when we look at an equation and we see that there's no sign associated with it, it's usually because it's the first number. And to keep it clean, we don't want to put the plus sign in front of the number at the beginning of an equation. It makes it a little cluttered and it's a little more difficult to read. So if it's the first number, it will drop the plus sign because, like I mentioned, it's the default. We will automatically assume that the number is positive. Now, make sure you don't drop your negative sign. If the first number is negative, you have to keep the negative sign with it. So again, just make sure we keep track of our signs as we work through our equation and we're cleaning it up. Now, sometimes you're going to have two signs beside each other in an equation. And people, when this happens, they panic sometimes and they'll come to me and they'll be like, oh, well, what happened? Where did I make my mistake? And it's not that you made a mistake. You haven't made a mistake. Not, at least not yet. Maybe later you will, or maybe you've made a previous one, but just because you have two signs beside each other does not mean you made a mistake. It means you need to reduce it. When you have two beside each other, you want to clean up your line and you want to reduce it to only being one. So let's go ahead and look at this. So here is my quick little guide to how to convert two signs into one sign. And this works with an equation where you're trying to clean up the line and you want to remove one of the two signs because you don't want to have two signs right beside each other. It also works when you're multiplying numbers and dividing numbers, so keep that in mind. So essentially, we're going to go back to orders of operations and we're going to imagine that we're working through our equation and we have a plus sign and a minus sign beside each other in the same line. They're right beside each other. Now we want to be able to convert that into one. We want to reduce to make sure our line is as clean as possible as we're working through. So a plus and a minus would be converted into a minus. It's still a negative. So if we think about it logically, what we're saying is we have a positive number and a negative. We want to take away from that number. So it's going to be negative, right? So the end result will be negative. And the same goes for the reverse. If it was a negative and a positive, we still have a negative number and a positive number, so the negative would still outweigh. Now the tricky one here, this is the one where people can get a little bit confused, is if the signs match. If the signs match, regardless if they're both positive or both negative, they reduce to a positive. Okay? So it makes sense for addition. If they're both positive, people seem to get that. And what it is we're adding to a positive number, it's still moving to the right. Now with subtracting a negative number, we're still moving right on the number line. It's a little bit confusing, and maybe try to visualize a number line. We are taking a negative number and we're taking away more of the debt. So we're making it more positive. We're moving to the right of the number line. We're taking away from the debt that's already there, making it more positive. So the quick, hard and fast rule to try to remember, is it negative or positive, is if the signs are the same, it reduces to a positive. If the signs are different, it's negative. Okay, so if it's a plus and a minus sign, it's a minus sign. If it's a minus sign and a plus sign, still a minus sign. If it's a plus and a plus, it's a plus sign because they're the same. If it's a minus and a minus, they're the same, so it's still a plus sign. It's that minus one that really gets people. So keep in mind, if the signs are the same, it's positive. If they're different, it's negative. So let's look at some examples here. So our first equation, let's look at the numbers. We have a 3 with no sign associated with it, and because there's no sign associated with it, we can automatically assume that it's a positive number. So it's actually plus 3 plus 2. Now, the two plus signs aren't beside each other, so there's nothing we need to reduce. We can just go ahead and solve this operation like we normally do. So 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, giving us a final answer of 5. So there's nothing new here. This is all stuff you know. We're just making sure that we understand that if there's no sign associated with the number, it's still a positive number. Okay, so let's look at example B. We have a plus 3, right? Because even though it doesn't have a sign, we still know it's a positive number. And then beside it, we have a negative 2. Again, there's still no two signs right beside each other, so we don't have to worry about reducing. So we can go ahead and just solve this equation like we normally would. So 3 minus 2 is equal to 1, and that gives us a final answer of 1. Example C. Okay, so this one has two signs beside each other. Yes, there's a bracket in between, and let me just briefly explain what's happening here, because I don't want to get too in detail with the brackets. We're going to do a whole section on brackets, but essentially what we're doing is we're taking the negative sign and multiplying it by the contents of the brackets to expand it. So in this case, because it's just a negative sign, it's like a negative 1. So we're multiplying negative 1 into the contents of the bracket. The bracket in this case only has one thing in it. So the easier way to think of it, rather than actually doing the math to multiply it out, just drop the brackets, because really what it's here for is legibility. It makes it easier to read, because you wouldn't want to have two negative signs directly beside each other. It makes it cluttered and hard to read. Okay, so don't worry about breaking it out for now. We'll look at brackets next week, so don't worry about it for now. For now, just think of the brackets just there for legibility purposes. We can remove the brackets, and we can see now that we have a minus and a minus sign beside each other. This is what we're trying to focus on. This is what we're trying to reduce. We don't want to have two negative signs directly beside each other. So if we go back to our previous notes earlier, if we have two signs that are the same, regardless if they're negative or positive, they're going to reduce to a positive sign. So what we can do, because the negatives are the same, we can change the two negative signs to just be one positive. So we can clean up the line to be 3 plus 2. So now we have an equation that's straightforward that we can go ahead and solve. 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, giving us a final answer of 5. Okay, example D. So here we have 3 plus a minus 2. Again, the brackets are there for legibility purposes in this example because it's just a sign next to the bracket. In the bracket, there's only one number in it. Okay, so let's look. First thing we want to do is remove the brackets. So now we can see that we have 3 plus a minus 2. We have a plus and a minus sign directly beside each other. And we don't want to have two signs sitting directly beside each other without anything in between. So let's look and figure out how to reduce it. It's a positive and a minus sign. So those two signs are different. Because they are different, they will reduce to a negative sign. So we can change the plus and the minus to be one negative sign. This gives us a line of 3 minus 2. So now that our line is clean, we can go ahead and solve it. 3 minus 2 is equal to 1, giving us a final answer of 1. So I don't know if you've noticed, but every example that we did was 3 plus 2, or 3 minus 2, or 3 minus a minus 2, or 3 plus a minus 2. And the reason I did that was because I wanted you to see that having the signs makes a big difference. And if you would have converted a sign incorrectly, you would get a different answer. Okay, so be careful with your signs and make sure that you're keeping track of them. Hard and fast rule, if they are the same, they're going to be positive. If they are different, they're going to be negative. Again, that's just what I just said. Positive and positive equals a positive. Positive and a negative will give you a negative. Negative and positive will give you a negative because they're different. Negative, negative, or positive because they are the same. So here are the practice questions. These have a lot of brackets. And again, we're not focusing on brackets. They're purely here for readability purposes. It's just to make it more legible. And I want you to make sure that you're only solving one thing per step, which is why the brackets are there. So when we start looking at like C, where there's two sets of brackets, we're going to reduce the first set of signs first before moving to the second. So what you want to do is because all of these examples, they're all just here for legibility purposes, you can remove the brackets as your first step, and then you want to reduce the two signs and then work your way through. Okay, so you always want to make sure your line is clean, and then you want to make sure that you're doing one operation at a time and moving on to a new line each time. So you have all of Wednesday to do these videos. We will take up the answers on Thursday, where we'll walk through and we'll do exactly what we did today with the example ones. And we'll talk about any issues that people would normally have or areas where people typically trip up on. So please watch the Thursday video, but make sure you do the actual assignment. Actually write it out, actually do them. The more you do it, the easier it will come. And you'll hear me say this all the time, and it's going to sound like harping. Math is a skill like anything else, and I feel for the people who say that they're not math people. It's just they're not getting enough practice, and they're not having it explained to them in a way that makes sense. So if you're having any problems, please let me know. Signs are critical. If you have any problems with signs, it's gonna get worse. So please let me know if you're having any issues. You know I love to hear from you, so if you have any questions or any future topics ideas, please let me know. This content is meant for you. It's a study aid for you. So if you don't tell me what you want, then you won't get any help. So please reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video.